Okay, I've got it recording.
All right, greetings everybody. My name is Brian Gum and I want to welcome you all to the webinar, the Restorative Justice webinar for today, Restorative Justice by Design. And I'll let Howard introduce our guest speakers, and I'll do a little bit of an orientation to the technology that we're using today for the webinar, to let you know how to use it and how to engage in discussion with us, because we definitely want to hear from you throughout the course of this webinar. There's a few different controls that I can mention. Right now they might be hiding because you're probably seeing this in full screen view and seeing the PowerPoints. But once Howard brings that down, you'll have a series of controls available to you in the Zoom software where you can ask questions, where you can change the way the video windows appear. Howard, why don't you go ahead and stop the screen share right quick so I can go through that. All right. So if everybody moves their mouse across the Zoom window and looks across the bottom, there should be a stripe of buttons that you can see. And the one that I want to call everybody's attention to is the Q&A button. And that'll be the place where you can ask questions throughout the course of the webinar. If you have a comment, a thought, a question at any point, you can click that button and type in your question. It gets sent over to us as the hosts and facilitators and guests, and we can field those questions. Howard will kind of keep an eye on it throughout the course of the webinar, and then find places to interject those questions into the live discussion. So that's how you, as the people who are watching and attending, can engage with us, and we certainly invite you to do that. And also, if you want to get a little bit different view of the webcams, if you look up in the top right corner of the Zoom window, there are two buttons. The first button on the left is it switches the video mode to gallery view, and that changes the webcams to everybody being in like the same size webcam window. And then you can switch it back to what's called the speaker view, where the person speaking appears in the large video window and the others appear across the top. So that's a bit about the software, and we'll be recording this as well, and that will be available after the fact. You'll get an email in about 2 days with a web link to where you can watch the recording for this. So with that, that concludes my little section, so I'll turn it over to my former teacher and friend, Howard Zehr. Howard?
Well, good. Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon to all of you who have joined us. We're glad you are here. And thank you, Brian, for that introduction. It's particularly important because Brian is going to disappear after a while during the next 15 minutes or so. And so we're on our own after that. So hopefully everything will flow nicely. I'm excited by this topic today. You know, I'm working on a revision of Changing Lenses that I was asked to do, and it's taken me down memory lane a little bit as I go back over that. And I'm just thinking this is one of those topics I would have never imagined emerging from this field. Restorative justice by design, using restorative justice values to design transformative spaces. This is cutting edge stuff, if we want to use that metaphor. So I've got two guests. One of them is longtime friend and former student, Barb Toews. Barb was in restorative justice years before she came to our program. And then she came to our program and got an MA, and then went on to work with the Pennsylvania Prison Society, working with restorative justice in prison, and that remains one of her interests. She's also a top-notch trainer, has done a lot of that. She went on to get her PhD at Bryn Mawr in social work, and also worked with the Inside Out exchange program and designing courses that brings college students into prison into classes where prisoners and students from outside learn together. Her current research focuses on the relationship between restorative justice, architecture, and environmental design, and psychosocial behavioral outcomes. Research includes the use of art and design-based interview approaches. Now, she and our other guest, Deanna VanBuren, are co-creators of organization called Designing Justice plus Designing Spaces, which they will probably tell you something about. An initiative that explores the relationship between restorative justice and architecture and the design of spaces. Barb has done a number of publications, including several which we did together. One of them was Critical Issues in Restorative Justice, and she also did the little book of Restorative Justice for People in Prison, which is part of that series that I edit. And she has a chapter on restorative justice in prisons in social work and restorative justice, skills for dialogue, peacemaking, and reconciliation. She's now assistant professor in criminal justice at the University of Washington, Tacoma, where she seems to be very happy from what I heard. Deanna is a thought leader researching, formulating, and advocating for restorative justice centers, a radical transformation of justice architecture. She currently sits on the board of the National Board of Architects, Design, and Planning for Social Responsibility. She's a founding member of 4M, F-O-U-R-M, a design studio, a firm creating spaces for peacemaking and restorative justice. Before that, she spent 13 years as design lead in both domestic, institutional, and design educational projects in various parts of the world. She's recently awarded the Byrne Justice Innovation Grant with the Center for Court Innovation, and listen to this, to develop a peacemaking center in Syracuse, New York, the first of its kind in the U.S. Funded by the Fetzer Institute, she's also currently developing and implementing design studios with incarcerated men and women, as well as writing the first design guidelines for creating restorative spaces in schools. She got her BS in architecture from University of Virginia, M-A-R-C-H, and I don't know what that is, from Columbia University, and has recently completed the Loeb Fellowship at Harvard's Graduate School for Design, and is currently in the process of applying for another interesting fellowship. So you can see we've got some fun ahead from these two innovative women. Topic again, restorative justice by design, using restorative justice values to design transformative spaces. So welcome, Barb and Deanna. I don't know which of you is going first. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so that you can share.
Okay.
So take it from there. So after a while, after you've presented a while, we'll open the space for the kinds of questions that are coming in.
Okay. I am in the process of sharing the screen.
While you share, should I give my announcement?
Yep.
Okay, so I just wanted to apologize to everyone. I do have to leave the call a little bit early. I have an interview for the Rauschenberg's Artist as Activist grant for a mobile resource village that will be serving under-resourced communities and with a particular focus on reentry populations where there'll be restorative justice processes happening. So while I have to leave a little early, I think the relevance to our conversation today is that what we're seeing is support and excitement around the need for the creation of new spaces in our community that support reentry and restorative approaches to addressing crime. So I'll transition to you, Barb. Thanks.
Yeah. So how we've structured our time together is that we're going to start by having a little bit of conversation about current architecture and how that relates with justice values and justice theories, and then use that to jump off to talk about restorative justice and how that can start looking in design. And in the course of doing this, you're going to see a good number of images, some which are of traditional design, but then you'll start seeing images of other design work that is trying to apply restorative justice values. And so some of it will be explained directly, some of it is just illustrative, but we'll be taking you kind of through our journey of getting to a point where we are with why we're even interested in this topic, and then what we're doing to try and gather some information about what this design would look like, and then inviting at the end, you to think about how in your context you could be doing some design work and using the tools that we're going to be showing that we've been using in our work. So to get us started, want you to really be thinking, just visualize in your head, imagining a space in which you could face the worst thing that you've ever done, or face the most painful thing you've ever experienced. So I'm going to pause for just a few seconds and give you time to actually visualize in your head that kind of a space. Okay, so keep this image in your mind as we go through our presentation and you see other images. Deanna?
Yeah, so when I first started to think about this topic, I started by asking myself another question, in that what values is our current justice architecture communicating? You know, what are we seeing with the things that we already have? So in the context of what Barb asked you to visualize, I'm going to give you another thing to think about, which is, any of you have been in a courthouse or a prison or a detention center or a police station, what values are you feeling being communicated there? And in a way, how are those values also manifesting for you? So we invite you to share that as we move through the process. I'll take the next slide, Barb, and I'll give you some visuals for that, and maybe share some of what I see when I look at this architecture. I see very hierarchical spaces. It's very patriarchal. The architecture, I feel, is very punishing, and it's very adversarial. And are these the kinds of spaces where restorative justice can happen? Are these the kind of spaces where we can confront the worst thing that's ever happened in our lives, or things that we may have done that are bad? Barb?
Okay. So when I started working in correctional facilities with the Pennsylvania Prison Society, I was doing a lot of education for incarcerated people because they were wanting to figure out how to do restorative justice while incarcerated in their prison. So in the very first workshop that I was doing with a colleague to train people about the philosophy of restorative justice, I began to realize that the kind of spaces that I was going into didn't really reflect what I was trying to communicate in there. And the event that sparked my realization of this is that the men that were in this particular workshop were very resistant to thinking about victim issues. Anytime we brought up victims in the context of restorative justice, there was resistance, there was grumbling, there was concern about how they were treated unfairly, and that sort of thing. And my colleague and I decided we need to find a different way to approach this topic of victims to try and help people be a little bit more receptive to victim issues. And so we invited them first to think about the criminal justice system as a boxing ring. And on newsprint, we had them create just a two-dimensional boxing match and identify who was the referee, who were the boxers, who was the audience, and what was happening, and how in boxing everybody leaves bloodied, even the winner. So no matter who comes out supposedly winning, everyone's hurt at the end. The audience is just cheering on for whoever they want to win. And that image really resonated for them for the traditional criminal justice system and its theories. We then invited them to create what we eventually called a do no harm room and posed to them the exact same question that I posed to you at the beginning, but focused on the violence that they had all committed. If you could create a room in which you could face the violence you committed, what would that room look like? And so they created this room, and it had a big picture window with a mountain view, comfortable chairs, carpets, bookshelves, fish tanks, plants, children quietly playing because they couldn't agree whether to have children there at all, so they had to be quiet. A record player, a telephone, and just creating this on newsprint. When people would get uncomfortable talking about victims, my facilitator and I, we would go, are you thinking about victims in the boxing ring, or are you thinking about victims in the do no harm room? And more often than not, they would go, oh yeah, I slipped back into the boxing ring. And when they would just, metaphorically put themselves in the do no harm room, they actually could be more open to thinking about victim issues. So I've carried this image around in my head for a good 15 years of what this mountain lodge looks like if it was actually in real life and not just with markers on newsprint. And this is the image that I've carried around. Now, there were 15 of us in the room. There would be 15 different images of what this do no harm room would look like, but clearly very different than the images that we typically think of with prison. And so this really got me thinking about, wow, what is an architecture? How do we create spaces in which people are going to be able to be vulnerable, to let their guard down, to face the tough things that they've done? And started thinking then about what does this mean for design? And really challenging, if we're going to think about redesigning justice spaces, do we design new types of buildings, just make them prettier, but they're still going to punish? Or do we actually kind of start from scratch and start designing justice buildings that reflect concerns with accountability and transformation and participation and real restorative justice values? So as a way, this was actually the driving question for me to even go on for my PhD work. And so started to think about how to actually research what this design would look like. And so managed to do my dissertation research on kind of a proxy for restorative space, or spaces that were designed with restorative justice in mind through a lens of privacy. And did a study in which I was spending time in a women's jail as well as interviewing women using design-based methods to get them to create different types of environments. So I interviewed 22 women, and in each of the interviews invited them to create scenes from while they were in jail, but then also ideal scenes that would start getting at environments in which they could have some kind of psychosocial behavioral health and well-being, with that being part of an important justice outcome. And in doing that, found that there were two key features that were important in the design of these spaces. One, nature was really, really important. And here we have an example. Kristen here was creating space in which she could actually let out anger and sadness. And it was created to be a counter of what they do when they're in jail, where they lock themselves into their cell. On the day room, if you get a frustrating call or a sad visit or something like that, or someone makes you really angry, they would run to their cells and slam the door behind them and in essence lock themselves into their cell. And that became a way to let the other women know to leave them alone, because they wanted to let out these emotions, because it was either let the emotions out or beat somebody up. So she was invited to create a better space in which to let out emotions than a cell. And this is what she created. In this scene, she's on the Wildwood, New Jersey boardwalk. That's what's on the right. She's literally on the boardwalk with family. On the left, she's outside her hotel room, lying on the grass, looking up at the night sky with her niece, nephew, and son. And the middle with the palm tree, that's actually representing Puerto Rico. And it's calling back her father because she went to visit Puerto Rico with him before he was murdered. So nature was a big part of what they needed to work through emotions and work through experiences that they had that connected with their offending. The other key feature were house-like features. Many women created houses or homes which were furnished, where they could have friends over, where they could eat, where they could sleep and have comfy beds, where they could curl up with a book and read. And Uma here gives an example. This is her kitchen in her house, which looks out into her garden. You can see there's a pool, there's flowers, there was places to hang out with her family. Cropped out of the scene, because it was pretty big, was also a bedroom, a living room, and a garage, where she would have a car and also places inside to hang out. What she said to go along with this is that her home is a relaxed place. Now I'm quoting, to gather all your thoughts when you're stressed out. You got peace, are comfortable. There's not too much chaos or trials and tribulations. But God gave me this peaceful place. It is giving me a moment to relax and get away from the workplace. The prompt that she had to create this house was about a space in which you could have mindset change, where you could actually think about what's been going on in your life and how you want to kind of change what you've been thinking and doing, and then moving forward into a different kind of life. So her home was really important, having a stable place, having a place of peace. But then you can also see with her some gardens. There's always the question too about victimization, and certainly some of the women in my sample were people who had also experienced some type of violence. And Belinda becomes an example of how these spaces actually can help them work through the victimization experiences that they've had, not just deal with the offending that they had been doing. And for Belinda, as we were talking about kind of the times that she got away from other people when she was incarcerated, she needed space to cry. And when I asked her what she needed to cry about, she began to talk about how she'd been sexually molested by 2 of her brothers while she was growing up. And she had talked a lot about how she had stuffed in all that pain, and while she had forgiven her brothers, she had never forgiven herself. And so for about 30 years at this point, had been carrying around a lot of shame and guilt that she had never managed to get out. So I asked her to create a space in which she could actually let out the shame and guilt that she had been experienced. And she created this park scene that's on the left. So she is in a park that has a lot of trees. There are benches. That's what the blocks are there. And she is just spending their time there. And she says, I am in white because I'm not in jail anymore. This is just me, bended on knees, just talking, no one to hear, but God is listening. I can cry and get out the guilt and shame. I am alone and no one will be judging me and saying shit like, ooh, you were molested by your brother. So an important place for her. As we were talking, this was a really difficult interview for her, and she talked a lot about not being able to forgive herself. And in order to help her kind of, let's say, become more intact before she returned to the cell block, and to kind of work through some of those emotions and not return to the cell block deeply involved in crying and the heavy emotions she'd been experienced, I asked her to create a scene which reflected self-forgiveness. And what she did is she chose the magazine photo of the garden that's on the right. And this is what represented self-forgiveness. She says, if the time of self-forgiveness ever comes, I believe it'll look like this. This looks pretty serene. I'm in my house, content and feeling free. This backyard is like my serenity place. I would walk out there, thank God for my life and for overcoming my obstacles and for what I held on to for far too long. I had the opportunity to interview her when she got out of jail and showed her the self-forgiveness. And she talked about how she was getting closer and closer to that garden. She didn't have it yet, but she was getting there. So some images here you can see of spaces that these women are thinking about that would start getting at more restorative ideas in terms of justice outcomes. Deanna?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm coming in here from the architecture point of view, and that our goal has been as a practice to actually create physical spaces in communities for restorative justice and peacemaking. So we asked her, like, well, how are we going to do this? They don't exist. No one's ever really made them before. There were some indigenous dwellings that we looked at as for inspiration, but for us, we had to talk to a lot of restorative justice practitioners. That's where we began interviewing folks around the country. I got trained as a circle keeper so I could more deeply understand the process. Also had to understand the criminal justice system in greater depth. We started looking for innovators across the country. We started to research all of the current justice infrastructure that we had, engage stakeholders across a wide range from both criminal justice, restorative justice, architects. And then we started to develop and test prototypes, because what we were finding as we spoke with people was that they actually did need an infrastructure to support their programming, that qualitative and quantitative research, like proving that the design actually would support their process was needed, and that funding and education was a big piece. And we're like, well, how can we begin to start to do that? I'll take the next slide, Barb. One way we started was to develop a series of diagrams that from our learnings represented the difference between how is our current criminal justice system and its values being represented, and then what does a restorative justice system start to look like? And we looked at that on the scale, both at the citywide, like a much more distributed network of spaces, all the way down to the room. So then if you look at the next slide, just to show an example, I won't go through all of them. If we look at a courtroom, now, the courtroom is very structured based on that system. It's very hierarchical. The judge sits on a dais. Everyone's looking towards a very focused point in the room. There's a great deal of separation, walls, partitions, usually usually very solid, that are separating the community from the one who's been harmed, from the one who's done the harm. It's a very congested and chaotic environment. If we look at the Hogan, the Native American space, a Native American space for peacemaking, is radically different. The center is empty. The form actually envelops the process, and people are occupying the perimeter in a very non-hierarchical space. So we started to represent this and take these learnings and begin to approach practitioners and be like, how can we begin to apply some of this in your spaces? So I'll just show you two quick and small projects that we have and have done and are doing. The first was a very simple project. It was with Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth in East Oakland here at the Castlemont School. And they were bringing in a program that would be replacing suspensions and expulsions. And we also applied for a grant to get to do a space for them. And the space at the top in this image that you're seeing is really quite typical. People get any space that they've been given, if they get it at all. And I would say that the space at the top is disrespectful. I would say it's disrespectful to the people, to the process. The carpet was moldy and ripped. It smelled in here. The lighting was terrible. Things were broken, falling down. It was filled with junk. And we just did some very simple things. We replaced the carpet. We painted. We repaired things that were in the space. We zoned the space so that it could function for peacemaking, for one-on-one dialogue and discussion, for the program officers. In the corner was a small space for art. We brought in domestic lighting. We brought in plants. And what happened is that people were coming to this space and feeling very calm, very relaxed. This sort of aggression that had sort of instigated whatever argument or discussion or fight that happened was immediately reduced. And this is coming not from me, but from those who've been using the space and the program officers at the time. And so we were able to take some learnings from this into our next project, which is the project that Howard had mentioned with the Center for Court Innovation. And what this is it's a peacemaking program. It's a diversion program that will be at Syracuse, New York, in a very low-income neighborhood, the Near West Side, very diverse neighborhood. And so this was really our opportunity, I'll take the next slide, Barb, to set up what I call best practices. We believe that when we're creating new spaces in our community, that we have to do it with the community, that these are very micro-local spaces, that I can't deploy a sort of standard space and design across the country, and that because they're new, well, how do I know what they should look like exactly? We need to work together to create them. So we designed a process called the Peacemaking Palette. And the Peacemaking Palette helps bring the community together to experience what a peacemaking circle feels like emotionally and physically. They bring a texture, a material, a color. We also provide pictures for them. And they tell a story about what they brought and why they feel drawn to it and how it makes them feel nourished. And they place that in the center of the circle. And what we get as designers is a palette that we can draw from, that we can code and analyze that data. But they also have learned this is what peacemaking is. It's a new practice that most people have never experienced. So it helps the program, it helps our client, and it helps us. After we do that, I'll take the next slide, we have people break into groups, both those who have done the harm, those who have been harmed in the community, and tell a narrative about what is it like coming to the center? How do you feel? What is the first space that you come into? What would that be like? What do you need to feel safe emotionally? And it's incredible the stories that come out from people and the innate knowledge that people have around creating spaces that care for them. And from that, we ask them to diagram that. I'll take the next slide. And using a series of bubbles, some we assign, some they create, we're actually learning these are the kinds of spaces that we need for peacemaking. Here's how they need to be organized. And what you see even in this diagram is the peacemaking nestled within a buffer of support spaces. So I'll show the next slide, Barb, is a space of the peacemaking room. And what we've learned is that people don't want to come into a space that is sterile, that is really just about peacemaking. They want other activities to be happening there, to sort of have some visual interest, to have a greeter, to feel like they're coming into a space that's welcoming for them, but isn't just about them. That the peacemaking space is enveloped by reflection and quiet rooms, that you have outdoor space, that people feel like they can move outside of the circle and care for themselves and take some time to reflect, sort of a buffer zone that we call it. And from both of these processes, this project is actually going into construction now, so hopefully next time we speak, if we do, you'll be able to see it in completion. It is the first of its kind in the country that we know of. I'm sure that it'll be a prototype for replication with this best practice. And we've taken knowledge from this project and from the Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth space to start to create a set of design guidelines for schools, but also for communities. So I'll take the next slide, Barb. So this is Barb and I's great project that we're still working on, and what it's doing is really taking processes both from Barb's dissertation research and from our real world projects to create a toolkit that can be used in any community. I mean, we focused on high security settings because that's the most challenging, but it's really a toolkit for investigating restorative justice and design for anybody. And so some of the projects we see coming out of this have been amazing, far more amazing than anything that I've done. I'll take the next slide, Barb. And I just want to show you some of these. This is a restorative courtroom, which I spelled restorative wrong, so you have to forgive me. My spelling is, I'm a designer, not Barb's the writer. And what you're seeing is a very different courtroom than the one I showed you before, right? There's a much more idea about non-hierarchical space, a table, people sitting around the table, the jury room, and the holding cells, which are usually horrific spaces, are actually directly attached. They have natural light. There's a way to get out. Barb always reminds me and reminded them that, what's missing is a space for victims. That's not in here. That's a design change that we would make. Then I'll see the next slide, Barb. Another project is with our Chester class. We did a class in Chester Prison with both inside and outside students. The courtroom was from that. This is another project from that class for the redesign of the waiting room, and understanding that the visiting room is a place where those inside and outside worlds come together, and that they need to be nourishing for communities and for children and spouses and family members that are coming here. And so using our toolkit, they've created models, and you're looking at a diagram. I love this next image, which is of the waiting room. This is a perspective that they drew. I mean, these are very architectural tools that people are harnessing, where they're thinking about lighting and how people move in the space, how to create privacy through these sort of very low, transparent walls, so that people can feel like they're having some intimate time, much needed intimate time. I'll look at the next project. Another great project that came out is this healing center. Done by some students at San Bruno Jail here, where you have a space side for both victims and offenders around a courtyard where they will come together. This is an in-residence facility. So these are new types of architecture we're talking about. We call them typologies. So we're not repeating the idea of a prison and jail, a new type of prison or jail, but we're talking about an entirely new kind of building. I'll take the next one, Barb. The Restorative Pod. This was one group that, our students choose what they want to design. One wanted to look at how do we create a pod that was actually nourishing for us. You'll see some themes in here that was coming out in Barb's research of nature, views to trees. You see the trees there, and just the creation of a space that's more respectful for them. It feels more like home. You can look at the next one. I think this is one of my favorites. It's very simple. It's called the Healing Sun Center. This is a space for dialogue, for peacemaking, around the idea of the sun. Again, representations of nature and views, and the idea of using very warm natural materials as the kind of spaces that conflict resolution would occur. I'll take the next one. Barb and I are different places, so I always have to ask her to forward my slide. This last project I'll talk about quickly is a project that is a real world project. Barb and I will be going into Santa Rita Jail next week. We'll be working with a group of 20 incarcerated men to develop a restorative reentry campus for them in Alameda County, which is where I live. And we're also going to be training them to then, once they get out, to facilitate dialogue around design within the community. The community is very resistant to this being there. And so we're trying to take a restorative approach to the entire project, where they're actually going to be able to meet these men and work with them, and around the idea of how can we create a place that's really for all of us, because that's what it is. And again, this is an entirely new kind of place in our communities. It's very, very exciting to be a part of it.
Can I just add something? Do you mind?
Please.
I think it's important to note that we're being invited in by the criminal justice system to engage the guys very intentionally on this topic for that project.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's coming from all different places.
Okay.
Thank you. So, there are different ways to get a community thinking about this, and this tool is really trying to democratize this. You don't always need professionals to come and do that. That you have the power, and that these analog tools are very powerful ways of investigating this. Some of the tools, just to be specific, that we have found to be some of the most successful, I think the first one is the visual diary. The visual diary is something that you can take with you. Architects, designers, engineers, artists, all kinds of people use this as a way of thinking about and exploring design. With prompts, people can sort of take this and go into their community and begin to record their thoughts about space, about design, through both sketching and words. The next tool that I think is Barb's favorite, I shouldn't speak for her, but I think it's her favorite.
Nope, it's mine.
is collage, and you know, architects will call this precedent research, but it's essentially the sort of the use of pictures and imagery to express oneself and one's ideas. This is a collage that's looking at what represents the spaces of the criminal justice system on the left, and let's imagine a justice system based on love. What would that look like on the right? This is a very powerful and very easy tool to use with anybody, anywhere. A third tool, it's very simple, it's just diagramming. Learning how to just simply represent ideas about space at any scale, at the scale of the room, at the scale of the city. You know, how are people exploring and occupying space? This is something that can be done on any medium, with a pen or paper or anything, both in your visual diary and not, as a way of exploring very complex things. And it's very accessible and very easy. I'll let you talk about the model making blocks, since I think Barb's used this the most.
Yeah. There's two different ways that we've had participants do models. One is with paper, folding paper to create walls and rooms and that sort of thing. And you can see that in a lot of the images to this point. Another thing that I've used a lot is blocks, and just blocks that I get at like AC Moore or Michael's, that sort of thing. And people use those to create walls, furniture, different kinds of settings, you know, with, on the right, the image with the park. Daphne there has used blocks to create anything from her furniture on her porch, which is there on this side of the clear fence, and then also creating games over in a park, which is on the other side. So it becomes a way to start creating a three-dimensional environment. And then coupled with paper.
Yeah. So, you know, these are standard tools that designers use, and there's really no reason to not to democratize these. And, you know, with these tools, you can work in your community, in your context, whether it's with a congregation or with a course or a class. And so we would love to hear from you, you know, and to have you think about how can you use these design tools in your context? Which ones might resonate with you? How would you use them? Would you use them? And could you use them? We're finding the answer to that to be many-fold. Like, it's been very, very easy for us and very accessible for people. It always is a surprise to me. You know, I think we're training folks to use this within 10 hours, 2 to 10 hours to be able to use these. So, you know, we want to hear, it's helpful for us to hear from you about how you might be able to use these. I think we have your last question.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to flip to our contingency slides to look at some real world designs that are happening that are starting to fit in with our framework. I'm going to flip through slides here just to get to some slides that were on reserve if we had some extra time. There are starting to be some designs in the real world, in addition to what Deanna has been doing, that are taking some of restorative justice principles or trauma-informed or other kind of peacemaking principles and using them to shape design work in justice settings. And we'll just look at two of them quickly. The first is this facility in Kansas, Johnson County, Kansas, where the architects worked with social work consultants who were very informed with trauma to design their youth detention facility. They took the perspective that in trouble and particularly committing violence are coming from a place of experiencing their own traumas. And so when they are in detention, the programs that they participate in need to be trauma informed so that you're actually getting at kind of what the issues are. They decided that meant the building also needed to be trauma informed and started to think about what does trauma informed look like. And of many things that Deanna, I've seen of people saying they're doing restorative design. This is actually one of the few places that got us really excited to say, yeah, you know what, they actually are applying theory in their design. So right on your left there is the entryway into the facility. And I think what's a particular note is they also took child development and took that into account in their design, in addition to trauma informed. So the circles that you can see that are in the artwork on the top are showing up down here at the bottom. As the sun changes during the day, these circles move and change based on where the sun is. And they really was part of that was attending to how adolescents have a particular sense of time and what time means based on child development and what they know in that area. So they were trying to be very intentional about that. They also had green spaces, as you can see on the right. The materials that they used were natural materials, even in building, with wood and stone on the outside of the building. So they started to really get at this. The other one is...
I'll just add something, Barb, real quick to that. If you go back one, we don't have time within the context of our talk today to talk about evidence-based design research, which is research that's been data-driven around the design decisions we make based on real-world conditions, very quantitative and qualitative data. And some of the things you're seeing here are representing that the daylight is very soothing and healing for us, that we need to have that. It's often not seen in our justice spaces for a lot of reasons, security primarily. And you see these spaces are really harnessing that and really using that. Also, the inclusion of art into spaces that are restorative is essential. It's embedded into that. It's not something you always just stick on a wall, although there's nothing wrong with that as part of that. But you can see that they're starting to create an embedded art aesthetic. And that the natural materials Barb referred to are local. There's a sustainability piece to that they're coming from nearby, and they're representative of the environments that people are living in. Thanks. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah. And then the other one is at a women's correctional facility in Iowa near Mitchellville, where the warden there invited the landscape architect department from Iowa University to come and initially just put some shrubberies and a magnolia tree on the prison property. But the architect that they were working with said that they wouldn't come just to plant some shrubbery, and actually began a process then of creating outdoor classrooms for the women at this facility, so that programs could go outside, counseling sessions could go outside, and there were places for the women to gather outside. They don't have completed photos yet of the work that they're doing. It's still in process. It's a multi-year kind of thing, but they're getting there. One of the things that they noticed while they were working outside, because the incarcerated women at that facility, as well as some incarcerated men from another facility down the road, were helping them to do the outdoor spaces, they noticed that staff were just hanging around their cars to smoke when they took a break, and realized that the staff actually had no nurturing place in which they could go to relax and get some respite from the intensity of working in a correctional facility. And so here you see a rendering of the space that they're going to actually be creating for staff as well. So they've been trying to figure out, what are the needs of staff environmentally, as in addition to the needs of the women environmentally. So you get an image of a sense of what they're doing in this particular facility. And we've had the opportunity to meet with people in both of these places, which has been really exciting.
And it's been exciting too. I think that the construction of it also was done not by the women in this case, but by the men from a local institution, where they will also be going in and doing the same kind of thing with them. And we've encouraged them, and I think they will be working on also the design with the men and women around these spaces, that they should be and can be included in envisioning these spaces as well, as the end users ultimately.
So I'm going to backtrack to here and wind up our part of the presentation by asking you to go back to that space that you thought out in the beginning as a place where you could face the worst thing you've ever done or deal with the worst pain you've ever experienced, and just kind of reflect for a little bit about that space and some of the images that you've seen in the presentation, and where there may be some similarities, where there may be some differences, and also being aware of what your reactions are to where they're similar and where they might be different. So we'll close and leave those questions with you, and we can hear from you on those or open it up to some conversation.
Whoa, that's fascinating, fascinating. Thank you so much. Well, let's open it up for some questions. Early on, Lydia asked Barb why you were just studying women. And I guess I could add the question, do you think it changes if it were men? How would it be? Because you've done a lot of work in men's prison as well. Any
Yeah, I did women where I could get easy access. Because I wanted to do field work, there was just no problem getting in to hang out on a women's cell block. On a men's cell block, it would have been that much more difficult. Same kind of process. What I would say in the meantime, a lot of the work that Deanna and I have been doing with design work has been in men's institutions, and we're finding that they're creating very similar kinds of designs, that the features are very much the same. Also, in even just talking with men about what the women created, and then also around notions of gender-informed practices, that's a big drive right now in the correctional field, that a lot of men would say that, you know, we need the exact same things that the women need to. We need access to privacy. We need to be able to be modest when we go to the bathroom. We want to have trees. We want to have all these sorts of things too. So I think I would find, I'm guessing, I'm hypothesizing, I would find similar kind of outcomes and similar designs if I did it with men. I think the meanings potentially that the spaces would hold for them might be different. The outcomes might be different, but I think we would find similar designs. One of the things that Deanna and I have done, every time we do a workshop, we photograph the designs that people create, their collages, their diagrams, their three-dimensional designs. And we're in the process of looking at all those designs as a whole, and those would include men's designs and women's designs and finding common themes. And I don't think we can really distinguish between which ones the men created, which ones the women did. I mean, we know who did what, but they're very similar.
We also have groups of mixed gender. We have had groups of mixed gender doing work, particularly Chester.
Yeah, the women were coming in from the outside.
Yeah.
Deanna, how did you get into this restorative stuff? I don't know if I've ever heard. I mean, this is not something an architect normally.
You know, I heard Tariq Khamisa speak on the radio. He set up the Tariq Khamisa Foundation. His son had been killed by a gang member, and he had taken quite a different approach to it by going to meet him and working through the real issues of the terror that young people were killing each other with guns. And I just didn't realize that was something people could do, make a decision to address a really deep hurt, a real violence in the family in that way. And I'd heard about restorative justice from Fania Davis, who's a practitioner here locally. And I became very passionate about it. It seemed like a very socially sustainable thing. Like I'd never heard of it before. And I had been for a long time very upset about the current criminal justice system, and I didn't really know how it could be different than what it was. So when I heard about this, I was like, well, I'm a designer, I'm an architect. How can I help? You know, how can I help restorative justice and peacemaking practices grow? And I think, you know, everything kind of starts with a question, you know, asking yourself a question. You don't have to know the answer all the time. And just talking to people and investigating, I realized that, well, I think we need spaces that support this. I know the power and the impact that design can have on our behavior, how we feel. And it wasn't being applied to justice architecture at all, actually. It was being applied to healthcare facilities. It was being applied to education. We were doing the research and learning how to change those facilities to get different outcomes. But the criminal justice system hadn't looked at that at all. And it seemed like a much better place to start would be with the real innovation and with restorative justice practitioners. And I think that was the right track, because people have been receptive to the ideas. And it has been amazing to sit and talk with people like Barb and like yourself and Fania about how do we create this and what does this look like. And now it is a body of research that people are starting to pay attention to. So
Interesting.
Surprise! I'm so as surprised as anybody.
Well, I'm glad you found it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Me too.
We don't have, I encourage people to send questions. We got a good solid group of participants. They're not leaving, but they're not asking questions either. I don't know. This is so new. It's just all going around. And
You know, I feel like sometimes this content is very new for people.
it is.
And you know what? Often, when Barb and I do talks, we include an activity because it's very kinesthetic, right? You're touching things, and you'll find that once you access things in that way, you have a knowledge that you probably didn't even know that you had. I think it's innate. But when you first get exposed to this idea, like, wow, how does this philosophy become a physical thing or space? It's, took Barb and I a while to get there.
So we should have required all the participants to bring a set of blocks or putties or something to.
We should have had anyone on the call today gets a free visual diary.
Ooh. So we're doing some questions here now. Cecilia asks, "It's a great job, nice work. I'm wondering if there is or will you run research observing how these spaces influence directly an RJ conference or circle compared to traditional spaces like those in prisons or strict institutions?"
Yeah, now that I'm in academics, and I have to do research, that's definitely what I want to be doing, is like hooking up, with Deanna's project when they have the Peace Center done, and doing research with what is the impact of the design. Already talking with the landscape architect and warden in the Iowa facility to do some research out there. What is the impact? They've also are starting to do some, they just built a new men's prison there too, and they're going to do some landscape there and doing research in that area. So it's definitely something that I'm hoping to be doing, because I think it's really important.
I think we have to do it. I think it's critical. It's such an important question. It's if we don't do it, it'll be very hard for us to grow.
Yeah.
And to do this work.
There is some research that's coming out on, for instance, the impact of murals in prison. Just in the last few years, there was a study done in, I think it was a California prison, where they put up a mural in the intake room of the prison and actually monitored the staff. I mean, they were thinking about the staff in this regard, about how it would impact stress and reduce stress. And they did pre and post tests that actually monitored the biological functions and that sort of thing, and found out that for staff stress, it went down once the mural went up. So there are researchers who are starting to look in that way in correctional facilities.
Yeah. And with the Peacemaking Center, what we'll try to do with that, we're trying to get funding for that now, and the Center for Court Innovation is very interested in this, is that they have a similar pilot peacemaking program in Brooklyn, in Red Hook, Brooklyn, with no dedicated space. And they're doing what a lot of, I call it the hustle, right? The hustle that a lot of programs do, where they just go wherever they can. Like, it's the church basement, it's the office, and sometimes they're locked out, and sometimes it's not in neutral territory, like all of the issues that come along with that. And we're going to be looking at the success and number of cases they're able to do in Red Hook versus what we've done in Syracuse. So that's another kind of research that we'll be doing.
And I just want to plug an idea that Deanna has been rolling around, and that's creating kind of like a travel design kit for a facilitator, so that when you're doing the hustle, you have like your own bag of stuff that you bring with you, so that no matter where you are doing a facilitation of some kind, you have kind of some of the standard basic things. And my guess is some people do it anyway, but you're bringing something that represents nature with you, color and texture that you put on the table to create a centerpiece or something like that.
A lamp.
A lamp.
A lamp is great. Great. So it's all in the Designing Restorative Spaces in Schools document that we have, but it needs to get, I think, expanded to practitioners anywhere. Simple stuff.
Simple, but important.
Yeah.
Susan says, doesn't this fit in with Norwegian's justice system, the philosophy of having normal space for inmates to allow them to retain their dignity? Is there a connection there?
Yeah, definitely some of the prisons that I've been looking at over the last few years are ones that are in more normal natural environments, such as Bastøy Island in Norway, which is on an island where people have access to the water and hiking and skiing and animals and that sort of thing. There's also some other interesting designs in Austria, as well as Australia and Canada, where they're very differently designed to get at dignity, arguing that you can't, how do you have responsibility if you don't live in environments which actually communicate that you can be responsible and give you responsibility. So there are some of those, there's definitely some connection there with those.
Yeah. And currently those spaces are being studied for the impact that they're going to have. They're expensive buildings, and then the architecture community, the justice architecture community in the United States is looking at those projects and they're like, there's no way we'll be able to do that here. And that may not be the case. That may be the case right now, but I think once we start to see what impact those spaces are having with the data, we could start to see some of that coming this way.
Adriana says she has a question about these functions, the spaces long term. The people that help design the space, just disappeared here, hold on. The people that help design the space obviously feel invested and empowered. How do you think outsiders or people who are not involved in this process will respond to a space they did not help create?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. It's something that I think about, because we try to engage as many members of the community as possible in it, but we can't get to everybody. So I don't know yet. And it'll be interesting to see how people like, well, hey, why, if they come there like, hey, wasn't I asked to participate in this process? My hope is that because we're trying to utilize local craftspeople, like for example, in the Syracuse project, we're working with a local organization that uses reclaimed trees, working with men and women coming out of prison and jail to develop those, and they're in the community, people know them, that in this way people will come there and be like, oh, I recognize that furniture, that's furniture being made in my community, or an artist that they might be familiar with might have their work in there, like, oh, I recognize that artist. Or we are doing sometimes collective murals where we'll have youth participating in and making pieces that we aggregate and create a larger piece that they'll be able to see that, okay, well, youth in my community are participating, so that the quality of the space is very tactile and the quality of the space is very much connected to people, and it feels very human, so that even if they aren't directly involved, the feel of the space is really embodying the community that they live in. So I'll know more in the coming months, but it's a good question.
Yeah, the parallel question for me is, there's studies in the past that suggest that the reason criminal justice good intentioned reforms go astray is that as the original charismatic visionary people move on, other people without those visions and without those values and with their own career interests and start taking over, and it loses it. So the question is, can you build into those spaces somehow the things, the values and so forth that keep them going? But the questions are coming in now, so.
Okay.
Dan asks, it says, great to hear what you're doing. How can we break our assumptions about justice systems buildings so we aren't just incrementally changing existing ideas? How do we come up with crazy ideas that fundamentally challenge existing paradigms?
Yeah.
That's kind of what you're doing, right? But how do we do that?
That's the idea. I mean, that's the idea. And it's really about bringing together the people who really want to do something very new and innovative. It's coming together, that because there are people like the sheriff here who's asking us to come and help develop this reentry campus, or the sheriff's department that I'm working with in San Francisco who want to create this mobile restorative justice pop-up resource center that's going to go around the community and just pop up and do this stuff. I mean, no one's ever done these things before. I have to say, my daily life feels a little crazy because I'm like, well, I don't know, because we've never done it before. And I think setting up these prototypes and deploying that prototype. So like Barb and I have a website, and we send that out to be like, hey, look, this is a prototype. Here's how it's working. Why don't you guys try it and see what happens? And I think that the development of these and deploying them robustly is where we're at right now, because the time is ripe change arena.
So the last few questions get me thinking about, oh, can I respond?
Please respond because I'm
Okay.
going to have to go soon. So
Okay.
I'm segue.
That's a shame, but you have to go, don't you?
Yeah, so that this prototype that we were just talking about can get funded.
Yeah.
I got them to push it back an hour. I'm like, please push it back. I don't get many chances for people to actually let me talk about restorative justice and design.
Well, we should have been encouraging people in the chat window to be sending you all these endorsements that you could take.
Well, what I'd love for you to do is please email me. Please contact me if you have any questions and want and need any type of support, and maybe trying to launch some of these initiatives in your own communities. Obviously, you can contact Barb too, but she'll be on the call for longer. But please contact me. My information is in the presentation, and Howard also has it. And just email me or call, and I'm always happy to talk with you about it.
We've had a question whether you are willing to put your PowerPoint make it available on our website along with
Yeah.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, just whenever you have to leave, let us know. But Barb, go ahead.
I'm going to pass on. Thank you
so
much.
Thank you so much. Well, maybe we'll get you back.
I hope this goes well. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Good luck.
Bye.
Do well.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Break a leg or whatever it is.
Oh my God! Don't say that, Howard. Okay. Bye.
Bye. See you later. So what I was thinking about, just all the last few questions taken together, is I'll try and make it coherent. I often show this mountain lodge to people, and their first reaction is, "I don't even have that. Why should someone who's committed violence have that?" And it really opens up this whole other conversation, where you start getting at, even people who would say that they don't really support punishment, all of a sudden they do support punishment because they sure don't want this. But it also starts tying into other social justice issues about why, not that everyone needs to have the multi-million mountain lodge, which this is, but why don't people have access to nature? Why don't people have access to warm homes? And which starts getting into notions of other forms of social injustice and other forms of design and urban planning and those sorts of things. And with the spatial information design labs who've been, mapping incarceration and have uncovered these $1 million blocks in major cities where $1 million is spent every year to incarcerate people just on one lone city block. Their mapping has also gone down to land use, that these $1 million blocks are also blocks that are just full of empty lots, brownfields, wastewater treatment plants, rundown houses, abandoned houses, all that sort of stuff. And there's this real kind of, design really becomes about power. Architecture is about power. Planning is about power and marginalization. And I think that we can do even all the radical things we want to do in the criminal justice system, but we actually won't make change until we kind of spread out and start asking these larger social justice kinds of issues. And what's been really fun for me is that, I've been doing relationship building with urban planning. And so here on campus, I actually have a project going with their GIS department, which is the mapping, that social mapping that Spatial Information Design Lab has done, to start looking at green space here in Tacoma and how does that connect with where people who've offending lived, where social services are, and those sorts of things. And, what's the relationship between those sorts of things. So I think there's really a big picture about how do we create the radical change and how do we do it at a large systemic level, which might build in some of that sustainability kinds of issues. But then also, we haven't, marketed the toolkit that we've been creating in this webinar, and certainly we could do that. We are creating a toolkit that we want to have accessible to everybody. We're hoping to have it done by December 31st. And available publicly on our webpage. And we want people to be, taking these tools and, in all different kinds of context, get people to do amazing, really what comes up when you get people to stop using words and start getting them to use images. Even here, I teach a class for criminal justice majors on helping in communication skills. So that when they get out there, they're thinking bigger about their role than just, arresting people or that sort of thing. And I had them do collages about what it means to help an offender like if you were an offender, what are the images that come to mind about how you want someone to help you? If you're a victim, what are the images that come to mind? And we got to a whole other level of conversation than we did from reading a text. So I think that Deanna and I would like to argue that if we would start doing some of these more creative kinds of things, start thinking about pictures and the way pictures can speak and communicate emotion and that sort of thing, we might be able to start incrementally making some radical shifts. And I'm someone I'm a baby step kind of person. So, I'm looking for just that incremental shift and kind of slowly moving forward and hoping that maybe in time we'll have this radical change. We've created this system over many, many years, and it's going to take many, many years to change it, especially when there's the link to like the social issues and social perspectives. So that's it.
Well, we've got a couple more questions here. It's I wish Deanna was here for some of this, but Lauren says, very interesting presentation. Can you talk about how you connect with certain incarcerated individuals who help design these spaces using the tools you discussed? What were your experiences working with the prison/jail administration throughout this project?
Okay, just to make sure I heard correctly on the first part, it was like, what were the interactions like with the incarcerated people?
Talk about how you connect with certain incarcerated individuals who help design these spaces using the tools you discussed. And then I guess the question is, what were your experiences working with prison jail administrations when you had projects that were inmate or initiated?
Yeah,
that commentary, but
so let's see if I'm answering the question. For everything that we've done, we've gone through existing relationships that we already had. So when I was out on the East Coast, I had already a lot of relationships in the county system as well as the state system. And so I had those relationships built to get us in where I was very lucky. I could call up a warden and say, hey, we can offer this 12-hour workshop for free for you guys. Would you guys be interested in running it for the women in your facility? And they go, yeah, they're looking for something to do. They really like the art and design aspect of it. Because we have women journaling, they're really into that as well. They don't necessarily know that we're having them do like visual journaling. It's very different than what they might expect. In the forums in which it was both outside and inside people, that was in the context of the Inside Out Prison Exchange, where I was employed by Haverford College to teach in this process an undergraduate class in the correctional facility that would include the outside students and inside students. So that was going through that existing channel. The ones that we've done here on the West Coast have also been through existing channels. So the one we did in San Bruno Jail was through Community Works, which does the RSVP program inside that jail. So she allowed us to take up part of their program time to run the workshop. And then with the one that we're doing next week with Santa Rita, that's Deanna being out and about and knowing people and meeting people and knowing her home community and the projects that are going on to kind of be at the right place at the right time and knowing who the movers and shakers are in her community. I've been really impressed with what correctional facilities have allowed us to bring in. Not in all of them, but generally speaking, we can bring in scissors, sometimes regular scissors, sometimes it's children's scissors. We have backup plans if we can't bring scissors in. We have what we call our prison scissors, which is just a piece of card chipboard that's shaped like a ruler, and you create a straight edge and rip. Sometimes you can't bring adhesives in, so we have ways that people can stick things onto paper that involve slits that you can make with a pen and then tucking into corners, kind of like those old-fashioned photo albums. So we've really been impressed with how welcoming people have been. I think that correctional facilities and administrators are looking for anything that can happen, especially free things, and we don't charge them. So because we've been funded by a grant to do it. I would also argue that with the toolkit, there's just one-off things you can do in any kind of forum when you're already inside and get people to think about different design kind of things. What we know from particularly my colleagues at Graterford Prison, they all had magazines. they have magazine subscriptions. So even if you can't bring anything from the outside, if you're doing another program, tell everyone to bring a magazine, and then you work with a magazine to create a collage or something like that. So we've had really good luck. Good luck.
You know, our students sometimes have told us we ought to be offering a course in restorative justice schmoozing. Sounds like maybe we ought to be doing that.
Yeah, it takes a little schmoozing.
Here's a question, and Barb, I think you can see the question if you down at the bottom if you bring up the Q&A. But I'm going to read it, but it's a long question.
I got to figure out how to do that.
Make it easier for you. Hannah says, "This is incredibly powerful work. I feel so much gratitude for hearing this today. Have you heard of the relatively recent Blue Room project, Snake River Correctional Institute in Eastern Oregon? It's just named one of Time Magazine's top 25 inventions in 2014. Inside the solitary confinement wing of SRCI, Oregon's biggest prison, they project images and recorded sounds of nature, the forest, and so forth, in an attempt to give people on solitary access to connection with nature. I'm struggling with this idea, as I would advocate completely for minimizing the traumatic elements of spaces like solitary confinement buildings, but it seems also to continue to create punishing spaces, but to somehow buffer the intention of the space. I guess I'm just curious if you have thoughts about this, as I'm struggling to make sense of it. I
just found out about it while I was on the bus on the way here today. So like maybe an hour and a quarter ago, I found out about it. And so I haven't had a chance to read it, but I am very curious about it. And I'm so happy I'm in Washington State. I've been collecting reasons to go to Oregon, so I'm hoping to go down there and see it. So I haven't had time to read the article yet. I know that like my first gut reaction, just seeing that it was on a screen, was, why aren't you giving them real trees? So I don't want to comment more than that because I just don't know about it, but I'm going into it with a lot of excitement, but a lot of, I think, healthy cynicism as well. And I think we need to be very careful when we're talking about design that we aren't just prettying up spaces, that when we're doing design and rethinking design, we're really working at that philosophical level and asking first, what are the outcomes we want to get? And what's the way do we design to achieve those outcomes, as opposed to just putting in a tree, making the cell window bigger, because that's just making the cell window bigger while you're being punished, as opposed to challenging that notion of punishment. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Everyone look that up.
There was a fad a few years ago, a number of years ago, where they thought just painting cells a different color would reduce hostility and all that. Oh.
Yeah. I sometimes liken it to, you're just putting pink fur on a set of handcuffs. There's still handcuffs.
Go ahead.
Now soft. And so let's talk about the handcuff that's underneath the pink fur. So.
Let me ask, we did have a few minutes left, and that was the last question. And mine's really, not very formed very well, so you can just tell me it's crazy if you want to. But our community is in the throes of a big dispute about the possibility of building a new jail. This week, every night, for the first 3 nights, there's a meeting around this issue. The architect, they had an architectural firm do the assessment of whether we need it or not. Mm-hmm. And some good information came out of that assessment. But if we build one, what they're projecting is this kind of normal rectangular one level building next to the landfill and next to an industrial park. Mm-hmm. We're going to use what you're doing as the way to shift this conversation, this dialogue in the community. Any ideas on how we go about it? I mean, not just designing it, because is there a way that using these concepts we could get people thinking outside the box completely?
Oh, I think so. I think, asking people, and as Deanna said, I love the collage. So you just ask people to actually create a collage of spaces for them when they needed to achieve certain goals in their life, when they needed to be accountable for something, when they needed to actually work through a really difficult experience and that sort of thing. And having them then talk about that, and what does that mean then for just we have this group of people who need to be accountable, and how do we create spaces that are going to do what you want it to do for yourself? It almost becomes another dialogue tool, this notion of design creation.
Yeah.
That instead of just asking a question, ask people to use words to respond. You ask people to use images, and then let the image respond and be in dialogue.
You have a real gift for deconstructing something like that and debriefing something like that. We are too equipped to give suggestions for facilitators on how to do that. I mean, that's one thing to get people to do a collage. It's another thing to draw out of the meaning out of it.
Yeah. I don't want to make it sound really simple, but it kind of is. If you invite someone to go find an image of a space where they can face something that they've done, and they pick an image of a tree, you just ask, what's it about the tree? And they're going to say, well, I feel the shade, and I feel like I'm really nested. When I sit there on the ground underneath the trees, I feel safe because the leaves and the branches are all around me. And so right there, you're like, okay, so we need to be thinking about spaces in which people can feel like they're being held and they're being safe. So how can we create that? Or how is that different than this person over here who says they need wide open spaces? They just picked a big sky in a desert scene, and they say, you know what, in order for me to work through my stuff, I need to be able to see far away. I need to be able to not feel boxed in. And you can start imagining then what this means for how spaces should be designed, or just how people experience things differently, and how they might feel if they're just confined in a box. And if anyone's interested in working with this, one of the things that we've been doing in this toolkit that we're creating is that we give people tools, like we have 9 concrete tools, but we're giving people sample exercises of how to use that tool to talk about social issues. And then how do you debrief once people have spent, believe it or not, an hour and a half creating a collage. It's amazing how long people take and how serious they take it. Here are some questions that you can be using. Okay. Here are prompts you can use to get people going. So we're helping people out. So if people, maybe if I can tweak our PowerPoint, I can make sure that we put our contact information in there so that people can be in touch with us to get a draft form of that, the toolkit, or let us know when they want the final form when it's done.
Make sure we have a link to your organization too.
Yeah, yep.
If people want to be able to find that. Okay, I think we're going to start wrapping up. Barb, do you have anything you'd like to say yet as we wrap up here?
Sorry, I was just writing a note. No, just thanks for coming. Get a subscription to Architectural and Design and Nature magazines and love them, and see what images grab your attention and rip them out and start your own visual diary. It's really amazing how wonderful the world is when we start thinking about what it looks like visually and how it impacts us visually. That's all I would say. Start looking at the world around you and paying attention.
Great, thank you. Well, for